Now in 6.2, we're going to be dealing how to factor trinomials, basically three terms, where the leading coefficient to begin with in this section, the leading coefficient is just a 1, right? The number at the front is a 1. So I'm going to be looking for two numbers that when I multiply them is equal to 14. You see where I got my 14 from. And I want these numbers that when I add them is equal to 9. You see where I got my 9 from. So two numbers that multiply equals 14, added equals 9. I'm thinking 2 and 7, positive 2, positive 7. So when I factor this, it's going to be m plus 2 and m plus 7. That's it. Looking at my example 2, I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied equals 20, but when I add them, it's equal to negative 9. Seems like I'm dealing with some negatives because I have to add to negative, but when I multiply them, it's equal to positive. That means the signs are the same. I'm dealing with two negatives. I'm dealing with negative 4 and negative 5. So my factoring will end up being x minus 4 and x minus 5. I don't know if you notice on the exponents, I started with x squared and I wrote x to the 1. I started with m to the second and I wrote m to the 1. I do write the half of the starting exponent. So if I had started with my exponent 8, I would have written a 4. Like I said, I write the half of the exponent. All right, now here, I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 6. When I add them, is equal to 1. That number is a 1. So multiplied equals a negative. That means the signs are different. And I'm going to be thinking positive 3, negative 2. So my factoring will end up being x plus 3 and x minus 2. Here I'm looking for two numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 15. When I add them is equal to negative 2. Because they multiply equal negative, that means the signs are different. I'm going to be thinking of positive 3, negative 5. So my factor will end up being p plus 3 and p minus 5. Now here we're going to be dealing with more than one letter. I see C's and B's. I'm just going to look at this numerically. I'm going to start thinking of two numbers that multiplied equals negative 3, but when I add them is equal to negative 2. They multiply to a negative, so that means the signs are different. I'm going to be thinking of positive 1, negative 3. All right, so I see my first letter is Z squared. So that's the half of 2 is 1. So I'm going to have with z to the 1 plus 1b. I wrote b to the 1 because now here I have b to the second. So notice how at the beginning I have a z. So notice in my factoring I wrote z. My letter at the end is a b. I finished my first factor with a b. Okay, then my other factor will end up being z minus 3b. Okay, that's pretty much it. Now here, I mentioned at the beginning that leading coefficient was a 1. And when we're looking at exponents, the half of 5 is not going to be so interesting. So the way we have this is because we have a greatest common factor to begin with. Let me divide everything by 4. And then what we saw in section 6.1, I'm going to divide everything by 4. And then I'm also going to factor an x to the third. So when I divide everything by 4x to the third, I'm going to end up having x squared minus 7x plus 10. Now, just looking at the parentheses, I'm looking for two numbers that when I multiply them is equal to 10, but when I add them is equal to a negative 7. I'm thinking of negative 2, negative 5. So just the parentheses alone is x minus 2, x minus 5. Now, for my factoring, make sure you do include your greatest common factor, in this case, 4x to the third.